Welcome to the Full Strength Father podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Corper, and founder of Full Strength Father. Today is episode 14, Set the Standard. And I just got back from a little brief evening walk. The kids are in bed, the wife is relaxing, and I just took a little walk around the neighborhood, and it's a beautiful evening. And I felt impressed to come home and record this and just share the thoughts that I had on that walk regarding standards. Developing and maintaining intentional positive standards of behavior as fathers in our own personal lives is absolutely essential for our growth and our overall well-being and the growth and well-being and progression of our families. Our personal standards shape our beliefs, our values, and our principles, which guide our actions and our decisions in life. So positive standards of behavior help us cultivate good habits, improve relationships, and ultimately achieve success in various aspects of our lives. And as I was on this walk, I was reflecting on standards in my own life. Environments where I've had high standards sort of imposed on me by the culture and the environment of the place that I was in, and other environments where the standards were extremely low. I can think of a few instances in my life where this has been the case. The contrast between high standards and non-existent standards, and some where there's mediocre standards. If you listen to the first few episodes of this podcast, I detail the challenge that I went through about 6 to 8 months ago in my life, where I was in a very low point. And what I realized in reflection on that situation is what I had allowed to happen was I had unintentionally removed the standards that I had previously had for myself when it comes to nutrition, spirituality, and the health of my communication with God, with my family relationships, finances, all those kind of things. I let those standards decline and lost sight of what my standards were for myself. And so, thankfully, I have, because of my life experience, I have been exposed to environments of high standards. And so I had a reference point to refer to when I was going through that difficult time. So I'm very grateful for that. And last night in a conversation with friends, we were talking about this very same thing. We were discussing college athletes and the issues that you face as a college athlete with teammates and or coaching staffs that don't have high standards when you yourself do, and how that's such a challenging thing to be in an environment where there's a conflict of standards between those you're working with and yourself. So when I was in high school, I was raised in a faithful home, a Christian home, and we had standards of behavior as a family. Language, substances. We had standards for our nutrition and our health, and these standards were spoken and unspoken. They were exemplified by my parents, and I'm so grateful for that, because that set a tone for me of how to operate in my life. And what was interesting is I still remember as a high school student watching some of my friends who didn't have any standards. Let's talk about substance abuse, for example. They didn't have any standards, and in fact, some of them, the standard was within their family that they would be drinking alcohol at a younger age because it was cultural within their families. And so, in my family history, there's a history of alcoholism, and my father broke that chain by not going down that path that his father had gone down, which destroyed his family. And my dad had a really challenging upbringing that he overcame and came out on the other side successful. So I had heard those stories, right? And I, in some small way, grasped how difficult it was for my father as a high school student. So I had some perspective on it, but I remember watching my friends who didn't have those standards or values run into a lot of issues. And not to say that I was perfect throughout high school at all, far from it, but at least I had guideposts and I had some standards that I could operate by that I think really saved me a lot of trouble throughout those formative years. And then following high school, I served a full-time mission for my church for 2 years. So at the age of 19, I left my family, and I was actually in Boston, Massachusetts for 2 years. And in my faith, as part of that process, there's an interview process that leads to you being accepted to serve a mission. And that there are specific standards that you must meet in your personal life and in your beliefs, certain standards that are there that if you don't meet, you're not able to go serve a mission. So that was a goal of mine growing up. And so those standards that were there, I knew were coming. They helped me prepare to move into that next phase of life because I knew that those standards would be there as a full-time missionary. And then during those 2 years, from 19 to 20, 20 to 21, I didn't use any technology. I studied just books, and I had notebooks. I mean, I emailed my family once a week, and I talked to them on the phone twice a year. So it's very much on my own and full-time on the streets of Boston, communicating with people, talking to people, and sharing and teaching our message, doing a lot of community service. And it was an amazing experience for me. I'll just love the memories that I have from that time. But one of the things that made it so enjoyable were the high standards of our organization as missionaries. So we had a handbook of standards, and those standards included how you dress, so guidelines on appearance, language, interaction with other missionaries, members of our faith, and people who aren't of the faith. So we had this very clear-cut set of standards, and those standards were communicated and talked about on a weekly basis. In fact, we referred to them almost daily. And so what I developed from that experience, looking back on it, is I developed a reference point for my life of high standards of behavior in personal life. And gosh, I'm so grateful for that because that was one of the reference points that helped me get out of the challenge that I was in not too long ago. So think about your life right now. This is something I was talking about with my friends last night, was so many of these young athletes, college athletes or high school athletes have never really truly been in an environment where there are high standards of behavior. And I'm talking about interpersonal communication, relationship with technology, language, morals. What's happening in our world today, you don't have to look far to find it, is that the standards of the baseline standards of physical fitness, of virtue and purity in thought, spirituality, of families, of everything, just the way you dress, all of those standards are lowering consistently. And so we have this downward spiral of standards that are happening in the world at large, quote unquote. So naturally, who suffers are the youth and the younger generation because they don't get to experience at a younger age quality standards with consequences. And so they are ill prepared to face the challenges that they're going to face once they get out of the home. So think about your life, and have you ever been exposed to a culture where standards are high and they are upheld? And if you haven't, I think it's extremely vital that what I talk about today, that you think about implementing in your life in some form or fashion. And again, I'm speaking from experience, having been on both ends of the spectrum. Those of us who have served in the military, I have not served in the military, but those listening who have may be able to identify with the standards that are held in the military. At certain levels or certain organizations, there are certain standards. And within the military, there are groups that have different standards than others. Maybe you're in law enforcement or you're in the medical field or whatever. There are certain standards that are intentionally implemented for safety and for culture and for all those kind of things. But what happens if the standard's there and nobody upholds it? Well, the standard means nothing. So what I want to talk about in this episode are how can we develop our own set of standards and why? Why would we do that? And give some context behind how those standards relate to our personal growth and development as fathers. So I love this quote by Tony Robbins. Quote, your standards set the tone for your life. If you have low standards, you will experience mediocre results. If you have high standards, you will experience extraordinary results. And then from Ryan Holiday, which I think is a building on Aristotle's quote, he says, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. And so, too, is failure a result of our habits, our standards, our willingness to settle for mediocrity. Earlier in this episode, I mentioned that standards help us develop habits. So habits are a result of our standards. So standards are at the core of who we are. Now, here's an interesting thought. Very, very interesting thought. Listen to this. This is the thought that I had on the walk. Our standards can either be positive or negative. They can be conscious or unconscious. So there is no middle ground when it comes to standards. They are either generating growth for us in our lives, or they are generating decay and atrophy in a negative direction. I would think that the difference between conscious or unconscious standards is also very fascinating. Unconscious standards, what might those be? Do you have unconscious standards in your life about how you operate? Or are you consciously pursuing a certain standard for your life or standards? And as I read that and reflect on that, what I realize is that when I was really struggling, or if I look at my life as a whole, the times that I've really struggled, I have had unconscious, poor standards for my behavior, whether it be nutrition or fitness or finances or career or interactions with people. My standards are non-existent from a conscious standpoint. They are just, I'm operating on autopilot. I'm not actually holding myself to a certain level. And then the times where I am in a culture or I personally commit to a standard in my life, of my behavior, it is incredible. Standards allow us to operate with discipline. And one of my favorite quotes from Jocko Willink is very simple and profound. Discipline equals freedom. So it is through the standards that we have that we are able to display, develop discipline, and ultimately create automatic habits that lead to our success. Isn't that powerful? So the question is, how can you and I develop our own set of standards? It starts first and foremost with identifying our values. What values are important to you as a father? What are the things that you care about the most or should care about the most? These could be things like honesty, integrity, kindness, hard work, creativity, perseverance. You can come up with a few values that are your core values as a man and then prioritize them. And from there, identify what your goals might be to align your actions with your values. And from there, you are able to set standards based on your values and your goals in life, what you want to accomplish. And by looking at where you currently are, set a new standard for yourself. Set something that's challenging. It's going to force you into growth. And also something that you can be consistent in. So these are new behaviors that you will adopt, or existing behaviors that you want to improve. So just make sure that your standards are realistic, they're achievable, and they align with your values and goals. Now, as I look back on the frameworks that I discovered in my search for a reset, in my search for a way to get out of the hole I was in, I discovered mission, movement, meals. These are foundational benchmark standards for my action that got me out of that place. Mission, 3-minute drill, morning and evening. Review my mission and connect with it and set and schedule specific action items every evening. In the morning, review the mission that I wrote down the night before, look over it, connect with it, look at my action items for the day, execute, review in the evening, repeat. Okay? Standard. Come rain or shine, I'm doing that every day. Movement, 3 miles a day, 7,500 steps. That is automatic. That's one reason why I went on that walk, was to just hit that number, hit that goal. And I'm so glad I did, because it led to the insights that I'm sharing with you tonight. I just kind of wanted to go to sleep, but I felt like I should do that. So there's a minimum standard. Am I better off for keeping that standard? 100%. And within that movement standard, I have 3 training sessions a week, total body. And then meals, simple. My standard is 3 balanced whole foods meals every day. That is the baseline. That's what I do. That's how I operate. So think about how you can create standards for yourself right now, and then practice consistency. You're not going to be perfect every time, and that's okay. But just make sure that you hold yourself accountable to those standards and you work to live up to them. And then review and adjust your standards as needed. Now, a powerful byproduct of doing this in our own lives as fathers is that this will have a cascade effect into all other areas of our lives, including our closest relationships, either with our children, spouse, significant other, extended family, siblings. Those who are attracted to growth will find the standards that we are upholding attractive, and they will then be drawn to our momentum. The mission of our lives as fathers is enhanced and empowered through relationships with other men, other families that are on the same mission. And so we become who we spend our time around. And when those we spend our time with have high standards, it is a compounding positive momentum builder. It's amazing. And so you will be more easily identified by other men and families who have high standards of behavior when you are doing this yourself. So start now. I believe that 100%. So there's a principle that I wanted to pull from a book that I love, that I would recommend. It's called The Slight Edge. It's written by Jeff Olson. And this book, he talks about a concept called the slight edge, which is the idea that small, consistent actions taken over time can lead to significant results. So there's 3 main concepts in this book. Number 1 is the slight edge concept. Then 2 is the power of habit and the importance of mindset. I really want to talk about the slight edge concept and how it relates to standards. So the slight edge is the idea that small positive actions repeated consistently over time can lead to significant changes in one's lives. It's not a theory, but it's a principle that is present in every aspect of life. And I quote Olson here. He says, simple daily disciplines, little productive actions repeated consistently over time add up to the difference between failure and success. The slight edge is the single most powerful tool you can use to change your life. So, I believe that the slight edge concept is very related to standards that we set. Because what he's saying here, and what I draw from this, when he says the slight edge is the idea that small positive actions repeated consistently over time can lead to significant changes in one's life. The flip side of that is that small negative actions repeated consistently over time lead to significant negative changes in one's life. The slight edge is the difference between those small choices being intentional and positive, or unintentional and negative. And that's where the standards come in. Because the standards that we have, like I said earlier, whether conscious or unconscious, are the foundation through which we make decisions. It's the lens by which we operate, by which we perceive action in life. And so what areas of our lives are going to be improved by positive standards? Well, I can think of a few. Relationships, our own self-respect, or our relationship with others and ourselves, our personal growth rate, and our outlook on life are all areas that are going to be massively benefited by creating positive standards for our lives. So right now in my life, Mission Move Meals, those are my standards. Mission Move Meals. In Mission, that 3-minute drill that I mentioned is usually expanded a little bit in the mornings when I sit down and I do my 2 chairs experience or appointment. If you haven't read that book, I mentioned it in a previous episode, 2 Chairs, look it up. It's a book on prayer. So my mornings will consist of a longer appointment with my 2 chairs, which is my prayer time, where I review my mission and I talk with my Heavenly Father about what I need to do that day to be successful. So build into your standards the things that you value most, is my point. The things that if you get in line on a daily, you're gonna be at peace, you're gonna have purpose, you're gonna have direction, and you're gonna be able to sustain. And for me, I've noticed that when that isn't there, when my morning mission experience isn't there, that it's very hard for me to sustain virtue. It's very hard for me to sustain positivity and energy and focus, and I get super distracted really easy if I don't have that. So try to identify those really key high yield actions and just hone in on those. Keep it simple. Mission, move, meals for me, and that might be the same for you. You might find something else that you want to do, but I encourage you to establish high standards for yourself. Philippians 4:8, in conclusion. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Focus on positive and virtuous thoughts and set high standards for your thoughts. Because as a man thinketh, so is he. Get your mind out of the negativity, the filth, and the corrosive environment that exists online. Create solitude in your life, space for pondering, for prayer, and for meditation. Disconnect from the noise. And as a man, I can promise you that you will have more clarity in your life. And I know that to be true, both from positive and negative experiences, by having created solitude and also being encompassed by distraction and all of the things that come with that. Ultimately, again, another scripture from the New Testament, Christ teaches what standard we should have for ourselves. And this is deep. Matthew 5:48. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father, which is in heaven, is perfect. So this to me is Christ encouraging us to set the highest possible standard for ourselves, striving for perfection in all areas of life. Within context, that is the ultimate goal. And certainly, the standards we set for ourselves today are going to help us move in that direction. Although imperfectly and in our own human way, we work for that, we strive for that. That is the vision and the goal. And of course, we will fall short, but it's in the striving that life is lived to the fullest. Thank you for listening. And I will look forward to speaking with you soon in the next episode. And until then, live full strength or die.